Kia ora. Welcome everybody to the next webinar in our ongoing series, looking at how you can make the best use of different features in Vernon CMS. Today we're going to be looking at the person file and ways that you can make use of the different fields in that file to best record the information you know about people that are connected to your collection in many different ways. Starting off, let's look at a few examples of Vernon CMS and how we make use of the person file. The person file is one of many different files in Vernon covering a specific type of information. In this case, all of the information you know about people and organizations that are connected to the collection. So a typical example would be the artist maker field. So we can see on this record that we know who is the artist that produced this particular print. In this case, it's Auckland artist Rodney Funston. We can't enter a person's name in Vernon without that being first created as a record in the related person file. I can use the Go To button on the top toolbar to jump to that related person record. And so there we can see we've got one record representing Rodney Funston and categorizing all the information that we know about that person. So while it's slower to do the data entry and create person records as you go, what you do get is standardization of your data. So you're recording the details about that person once. And then also you're getting shared information across all of the records in the system that connect to that one person. So for example, if we later learned some new contact information for Rodney or some biographical details, we would record that once in this particular person record, and then we would be able to see that information everywhere else where we had connected his name to a person field, whether he was a donor, a cataloger, a maker, a borrower, a lender, any one of the many different ways that people connect to our collections. Within that person record, we can record multiple different names for the same individual or the same organisation. So let's have a look for Prince Harry. Here we have a record for His Royal Highness Henry Windsor, who's more commonly known as Prince Harry. We can see that we've recorded two names in the names table at the top. His preferred name or formal title is His Royal Highness, and we have multiple first names, so he's got 4 first names. And then we've separately recorded the known as. By default within Vernon, the standard display elsewhere in the system would be to show the known as and last name for that individual. But you can configure that in Vernon. So if you preferred to see the title, perhaps the first names instead of the known as, those are settings that we can help you change. We can see that we've recorded also known as a second entry. So he's also known as Prince Harry Windsor, and all of those names are part of what you can search on. So we saw before that I searched on Prince Harry and it was able to find him even though that might not be his preferred name. So we haven't got Prince in the preferred name at the top. We can also use the person file to record links to related people or related organisations. And again, we can see it on this example record for Harry Windsor. On the left-hand side, I can go to the Work and Relations page, and there we can see we've got a repeating table of connections to other records, and we can see that we've recorded 2, which are links to 2 other records in the person file representing each of his 2 parents. That relationship table can be used for any kind of relationship. It might be used for genealogical information connecting to different parts of a family tree, or it could be people that were related together for some work-related purpose. As well as recording individuals, we can also create records that represent companies. So I have a local electronics supplier, and we have a digital projector that's catalogued in the collection and linked to that particular supplier. So if I look for PB Tech, we can see that the basic concepts are the same. We've got a preferred name for that organisation, but optionally we can have other alternative names. So here we've got an also known as, where it's got the longer version of their name. where PB Technologies is their full formal title. If I search for the Victoria and Albert Museum, that's an example of a contact which is another museum within the museum sector. In this case, they may be a borrower of one item within your collection, and you need to record them in the person file as part of a loan that you're creating in Vernon. And so there we can see, again, we've got two names recorded, with the second one being the acronym. So they're commonly known as the V&A, and that is a title that we could search on, and then it would show their full formal title, since that's what I've marked as the preferred name. We can see then on that page that we can record basic biographical details, where they were born, when they were born, and we can also record contact information. So here we know a contact email address, and that may be necessary as part of that loan, for example, plus other details like what is their website, what's their phone number, their postal and physical addresses. Many of those fields on the first page can also be qualified by a date. So those things can change over time, particularly things like contact information. And so you can either update that information or keep, for historical purposes, the older entries and mark those with a date beside them. So that's the date at which we added that postal address, and we could in the future add a new postal address, and it would be up to you as to whether you want to keep the old details for reference. As part of the most recent update to Vernon CMS, we've added some fields for ethnicity and language. So if we search for my record as an example, we can see those fields on tab 2. So we've noted my ethnicity as being Pakeha or New Zealand European, and we could optionally record other details. So that becomes important, particularly for Indigenous artists. So you might want to record a iwi affiliation, for instance, within New Zealand, and record which particular languages they speak. Within the Aboriginal communities of Australia, there's thousands of different communities and many different languages, and one person may have a connection with more than one ethnicity or community and more than one language. And so those can now all be recorded in this table. There's both a keywords column, and then there's also text columns. So the community field is authority controlled, and the details field is a text field, and the same for language. We can also see other fields for categorizing the person records that I have. There's just a general category field where you can use it for any kind of grouping that you want to create within your person records. So I've used that as a category to say, well, I want to keep track of who are all the IT professionals we work with. And I've listed that as a category which I can now assign to multiple different people. We might also use the general flag field to mark particular records that some action needs to be taken on. We have some clients that have used the general flag field to know which records have been checked and are therefore okay to publish to their online website. So for Vernon Browser, you may be choosing to publish just person names, or in some cases, you may be publishing the related person record. That can have a lot of detail and it's not necessarily always accurate. So this is a way where you could note which records have been checked and only publish certain records rather than all of the makers, for instance. There's also a mailing list field if you're wanting to keep groups of records for communication purposes. So you might be noting, for instance, all of the individuals that are catalogued where they're going to be invited to gallery events. And you just create a term in that field and assign that to any of the relevant people. You can then make use of Vernon's export functions to periodically export that list. Maybe just to your email system, export a list of person names and email addresses where the mailing list equals a particular category. I'll just show an example of how one of our clients has made use of the general flag field. So we saw here that I've marked publish online in that particular field, and we can see how Culture Waitaki in the South Island have made use of that. So this is their website, which is using Vernon browser. And here we're looking at one photograph, which depicts several different people. They may not have been able to identify all of those different people within the photograph. And in this case, they've identified 3 of them. So there's 3 different people of the Forrester family. 2 of those records they've been able to research and prove that the biographical information is correct. And so they've added that general flag to them. And then just for those 2 records, they're publishing the whole person record with whatever fields they feel are relevant for the public site. So we can see of those 3 people, those 2 were flagged, and I could now click into one of those to bring up the public person information for that individual. And within the browser, that can in turn then link to all of the object records that relate to that person and are currently available on the online website. So this person was an architect, and we can see lots of the different plans that he was involved in, but he was also the subject of different photos that are in the historic photography collection. So now that we've got all of this information added, we can see how that affects data entry and how we can make use of that for searching. When we're entering information into a person field, the system will only let us select a person if that's already been created as a record. If there's more than one match, it'll make us choose which is the correct match before we continue. So if I typed in something vague like just the first name, it will come up and say, well, these are the individuals that it's found that are possibly matching. And then at this point, we would either choose one of those, or we would create a new one if the person that we needed genuinely isn't in the system. So it's through this button on the toolbar that we could create a new record in the person file if we had to. That's subject to security restrictions, so you can lock down which users within your system have the ability to create new terms in those related authority files. When it comes to searching, we can then make use of that person database to make sure we're actually searching on the same wording for a person as is recorded in the system. So if I go to searching on object, and I could search on the maker field, and we'll see the same thing come into play. If I search for Paul, it'll say, well, actually, there's multiple Pauls. Do you want to choose one or several of those? There may be cases where you actually want to search for objects that are related to a whole group of different people. An example would be finding all of the objects that were made by people born in the USA or companies that originated in the USA. You don't want to type in each one of those individuals, so you can go another level deeper in the search and first search for the people that are relevant and then find the objects that are related to any of those people. So we can do that from the same page in the advanced search. So I'm already searching on primary maker, but instead of typing in a name, I can use the options button at the top to go to further details on how I choose the people for the search. When I click on options, I'm now on an advanced search relating to person information. And I can search on any of those various key fields that are part of the person file and find the relevant people records. So let's say, for instance, we do want to find all of the makers who were born or started in the USA. We can look at place of birth. Again, that's authority controlled or controlled by a system list of terms. And so if I typed in USA, it knows that that's a valid term. It also knows that there's subcategories, in this case, all of the states of the USA, and you can choose to be as specific as you wish at that point. I'm just going to tick USA. The system will automatically include all of the associated terms, so all of the subcategories or smaller regions in this case. There might be several hundred of those in a whole country. And then I can use the next button to find all of the people that relate to that particular country. So in my system, I've got 10 person records that mention USA as the place of birth. When I click on finish, it'll give me a preview of those. So we can see there's a mixture of individuals and companies. If I'm okay with that list, I can click OK, and at that point I'm back to where I started. So I'm in the middle of that search on objects. And so now I'm searching on primary maker, and I'm searching on a whole group of people that I've found through that secondary search. That's found 5 related object records. And that's because some of those people records may be connected to our catalogue in other ways. They might have been lenders or donors, for instance. Now, when I click on Finish, all of these records are ones where the place of birth for the organisation or the individual was the USA. So that's the kind of complex search you can do to find a particular group of object records for a whole subset of people. The other thing the system does is keep track of where each individual person record has been linked in the system. If I go back to the person screen, and I'll pick my record because I know that I've been mentioned as a cataloguer and an administrator in various parts of the system. On the person screen, we can go to the roles page on the left. So underneath person, I'll click on roles. This is a screen that the system is automatically keeping track of. Every time that that person record is linked somewhere else in the system, it adds to these counts that we see. So we can see that I've been mentioned on some acquisition proposals, on a condition report, and so on. We can see that I'm the cataloguer of 17 different records back in the object file. So that gives you an instant count of where that person has been connected to throughout the system. You can also jump to those related records at this point. So if I wanted to see the 2 inward loans where I was the person requesting that loan, I simply double click on that line, and that'll open up those related loans as a list. I could view them in a window, which will open up, in this case, the inward loan window with those 2 different loans. And I'll be listed on the second page where the requested by field is. So both of those loans are ones that link to my record. And that's a way we can jump from the person record to anywhere else in the system where that individual has been connected. So that covers all of the key features that are available within the person file at this point. In the next major version of Vernon, we'll be adding some extra features for the person file. That includes adding a new pronoun field in the names table, so you can note the preferred pronouns of a particular person. And it also includes adding in new reporting fields in the object file, so you can more easily get to specific pieces of information on a person record for the related makers. So for instance, in an object report, you may want to include the maker's place of birth. That will become a reporting field directly in the object file in the next version of Vernon. So thank you very much for looking at all of the features that are available in the person file within Vernon.